Welcome to the curious case of lived experience sharing. No, that doesn't work. We'll figure it out. Anyway.
Did I grow in height or did I lose height? I went down. Okay.
No. We have clipboards.
I see.
With really cool markers. Hi Kavita, thank you so much for being here and for coming onto the podcast, The Curious Case of. Kavita is a psychiatrist among many other things. I'm fully fangirling about having you here. And so thank you so much for taking the time out and for, just being here.
Thank you.
So the first time I heard the word lived experience was because I did a course on mental health. And then, once you start getting into a certain space, you meet other people who are also in that space, and then you all start speaking the same language, and then you think it's very common for that thing to exist. So I was like, everybody must know what lived experience means. And then I talked to some people and they're like, what? And so on the one hand, within the mental health sphere, it's become this big, popular phrase and word that everybody's talking about. And then it's pretty much unheard in the general context. Even though if you try and explain it to someone, it sounds pretty
simple,
basic and simple. So the idea of lived experience is that people who have lived through a particular illness or condition or situation have developed expertise and knowledge about that purely by having lived through it and not necessarily through an academic formal education, right? And if that's how you think about it, then everyone has lived experience. Because if I'm a mother, then I have lived experience of being a mother. If I am bad at math, I have lived experience of being bad at math. And so in that sense, everybody has lived experience.
Absolutely.
And so the theme for this podcast is that mental health is more than just mental illness. So the topics that we're going to discuss will be a very wide range of themes and conversations we want to have. But in this particular episode, I want to draw that parameter or that boundary to say that today I want to talk about lived experience, having lived experience with a mental illness. So we will define our lived experience in this, for this conversation, as someone who has lived through a mental illness. Yeah?
Sure.
Cool. So, what is it? Why did we start talking about this? Why was there a need to talk about lived experience?
I think we are at an inflection point, really, in the way that healthcare, and especially mental health care, is being seen. And I think that's why...
Sorry, inflection?
Inflection.
Inflection?
Inflection. There's a transformative, transitional place that we are at. And this is my belief. And I think I'm very fortunate to be living through this time. But I'm going to borrow a little bit from what you said initially about lived experience and say that, like you said, everybody has lived experience. But if we look at the concept of what we do with it, life happens every day to all of us. A child learns how to walk, how to breathe. They don't need science to do that. We have intelligence, which is innate in each one of us. However, we also have a penchant as a species to try to explain it later. To say, why did this child walk at this age? What is the developmental milestone? Well, and we try to term that as science sometimes. But it is about inferences, it is about explanations, it is about interpretations of what I choose to see as the truth, which is life happens every day. You know how to do certain things on an everyday basis because you're a human being and alive. But your brain and collective brains of many people try to explain it then and write it down. And then send it out there and call it science, if it is done in a certain way. This is more true for things that are termed scientific or medical as well. And somewhere, people who then plan in the future for taking care of health or mental illness or mental wellness even, instead of looking at the truth of life every day, has started looking more and more at these books or at these interpretations, at these inferences that are written down in a certain format by a certain number of individuals and published in a certain way. That becomes the basis of formal, structured education for someone to become a professional in healthcare.
Okay. So, for example, children learn to walk at a certain age. This will happen irrespective of whether I figured out a theory in science or not, because it's just something that happens. We have a general tendency of trying to explain things. And so we're like, okay, fine. We see 10 children who start walking at the age of, what is the regular age? I don't know, 6 months, whatever.
One.
Okay,
on an average. Yeah.
And so I feel the need to put it down in a book. And now if anyone is ever studying children, they must take that as a milestone.
So if a child walks at 9 months instead of a year, or if a child walks at 18 months instead of a year, then the person who's read that book says this is early and that is late. This is an inference.
Okay.
This is an interpretation, because we've decided to average out something based on the first 100 children that we probably saw and the way the book was written. This has started being termed as science. And I think people have stopped really paying too much heed to the fact that there is an experience of life that's happening every day. There is science, which is very important. But when you want to go into the future and want to plan your own future about what I want to do, oftentimes the weightage, the salience, the importance given to this over that has changed a whole lot in the last few decades.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the point where science, the books, the knowledge-based expertise had become extremely important across healthcare. Now, in physical healthcare, often there are objective parameters, there are things that you can measure very quickly. But mental health is often not accessible to the outsider.
Mm-hmm.
It is accessible to the person who is living, can be elicited through questioning if the person is willing to. But also the beyond willingness is also, am I able to articulate my own experience in language?
Yeah.
Can I explain it? And then how do I explain it? With what words do I explain this? Especially if I'm feeling it for the first time, which is often the case with experiences with mental health or experiences that are new to each one of us. How does one explain it? So you start looking. You start looking for, how do I find the words to explain this particular emotion, this particular experience, this particular felt sensation even sometimes. And then you hear a description by someone else, or you might go to a book, because many of these are in the public domain, and say, hey, that sounds like that. But that's classified as a disorder, if that's the text I've landed upon. Or that sounds like, so this person's saying this, and that's what this sounds like. So then your brain starts figuring out, can I identify? Because I'm resonating with this, I'm able to identify and relate to this. Can I identify what's going on and find more words for it? Because we do want to explain things to ourselves, especially if it's a new, unusual, and sometimes uncomfortable experience or an unpleasant one. You really want to come back to the pleasant, come back to the nice, come back to the ordinary. So both these are valuable. Coming back to the lived experience part about why we are talking about it today, why the world is starting to talk about it. is that I think in mental health, especially, we never asked what was happening inside. We assumed that people with mental health issues would not be able to tell. And there is this abstract notion that everything that is the mind, the emotion, the feeling is impaired when there is a mental health issue. It's a notion, it's a very broad notion that you can't take this person's word now because they have a mental health issue. And there is a sense of, can I take this to be their truth? So I think one is that I think the world has realized that's not true. The other thing I think that I do think is very important right now is that there is a convergence, which is very recent, in the mental illness and treatment models. What do I mean by that? I think when we started off, the notion of mental illness itself, it was a new one. Historically, it was supposed to be witchcraft. People were condemned if they were behaving differently. And even the introduction of this being the concept of mental illness was, I think, a beautiful one at that point of time. To be able to say, no, this is not witchcraft. They don't need to be burnt at stake, which is what used to happen. But rather, this is an affliction. And then once it is termed as an affliction or a disease or an illness, then you can look at actually doing something about it and solving for it. So in that time, I think this was a beautiful concept. But that is how the entire subject of psychiatry or psychology started, to try and define this. And the opening of the portal into mental illness really came through illness. So when we talk about, again, coming back to lived experience, when we talk about this in today's time, I think psychology, psychiatry, these disciplines are also undergoing the change of understanding what their position is in the world today. Is it mental health and wellness that is being addressed? Is it only a certain kind of mental illness that needs to be looked at? Or is the spectrum of mental illness widening? Because you now hear the words mental disorders, you hear the words developmental disorders, you have the concept of neurodivergence. So I think the entire mental health concept and the mental illness concept is really opening up and expanding across the globe. And when you have that, then the position of almost like gatekeepers of the mental health and wellness piece has to broaden too. So it can't be just psychologists and psychiatrists looking after this. This transformative time is that the people with lived experience, who actually know a lot more about what happened inside and invisibly, I think that expansion is happening right now. And that's also why we're talking about lived experience right now, because we've understood it is not possible for someone on the outside to sit and say, I know what happens on the inside. And I do think that's also one of the reasons we are speaking a lot more about lived experience. There is a lot more talk, and there's a lot more space opening up where mental health, mental wellness, mental illness, lived experience, all these things are getting talked about. A lot of it is on social media channels, and a lot of it is by the younger generation. And this is, to me, it is the opening up of a portal. And in a way, how beautiful that we're talking about the invisible and making it visible in so many different ways, whether it is on an Insta handle, or it is in the movies, or it is in a book, or it is a dinner time conversation, or it is a podcast like this. I don't think it was imaginable when I started working in psychiatry all the way back at the 1997. I could not have envisaged that this could happen in my lifetime.
So what what we're talking about right now is a place at the table for people who don't have a formalized degree of education in the science, but have lived through it, and them joining the table that is sort of helping us figure out what to do on a larger level, right? So in an academic research policy level, people who've been through it should also be like, by the way, this is what it feels like. So maybe we should try that instead, you know. So that's one side. But then you talked about the whole social media bit, which now means that I don't need to be a policymaker, a researcher, or anybody. I have Instagram. I can say whatever I want.
So the forum exists.
Yeah.
Which wasn't there earlier.
And there are a lot of helpful parts of this, and then some not so helpful parts of this. And I mean, just off the bat, feeling like there is someone else out there who feels the same way as you, or someone who's able to put the words to that feeling that you were not being able to put words to, can feel really reassuring and make you feel like you're not
Absolutely
alone. And, and then there's also the fact that I tried something and it worked for me. And there are all of these kinds of benefits. So what else would you think are ways in which lived experience sharing in an informal manner through social media is helpful?
I think, very simply put, one of the biggest things that, in my experience, a person sitting in front of me feels is, I don't know anybody else with whom this has happened. It could not have happened to anyone else. So the experience is isolating, and loneliness is rampant.
To give context, you mean when someone comes to you in your session?
Yes, in a session when I'm sitting across, and because it's usually a one-on-one session or with a family in a smaller room, I have had the privilege of hearing personal stories day in and day out for the last, 25 years now. And it is, I think it surprises me each time how lonely it is because I work mostly with young people, how they think, but nobody will understand. And nobody will understand exactly what I went through. And that is extremely isolating, I think. To be able to go onto a social media platform, find words or find resonance or find connectedness, I think it's a very valuable experience. Not because of, there is someone else out there who thinks like me or has related to what I'm relating to. But the simpler, most important part, this exists. It's not just inside me. This is real. Somebody else has felt it. I think the validation of that experience for most people is so simple, pure, and reassuring that it is real. It's just, I think, life affirming and gives hope. So to me, that's the simplest thing. There are added things. There are things like, okay, who did this? What did this person do to do a solution? What are the words they used? Can I use the same words? Can I find other people through them? All those things happen as well, and they are beautiful as well. Sometimes it can be hugely triggering. Sometimes you've had part of the experience, and the person who's describing it has had a much longer, longitudinally, or a much more triggering or a much more complex experience than you, and that can create fear too. So it comes with all kinds of sort of pros and cons, as does life. So I don't think that I'm in a place to say this is good or bad. I think my experience over the years has been that for anyone, whether it is a mental illness or any other unpleasant experience like a trauma, For someone to know that this is real is very important. And I would say for me, that trumps almost everything else in terms of the need for lived experience accounts to be out there.
And I think that it's important to sort of explain what it feels to be like, oh, it's true, because that's a very subjective feeling, right? And so, me telling you what happened to me versus me saying to you, I understand what you went through, it seeps in far more emotionally when I don't have to say to you that I understand what you're going through. And then, even when that can't be said in a truthful manner, because I may not understand, the idea of each person's truth being their own. So my favorite example is that if the AC is at 24 degrees Celsius, you feel cold, I feel hot. Who's lying? You're not lying. You're actually feeling the way that you're feeling. And no matter how I may be feeling, you are still feeling that way. And it would be ridiculous for me to be like, no, you don't feel cold. But we sort of do that with emotional experiences. And I don't know about you, but I feel like that allows you to then do something about it ahead. Because otherwise, I'm spending so long trying to convince myself whether it's real, whether it's not real, why this happened, whether it should be happening. Whereas that sort of allows me to move forward. If I choose to, I can still keep going back. That's, I have to be able to put in that work. But
I find it useful sometimes to not look at these experiences as nouns and descriptions, but almost like saying life is happening to each one of us. How are we receiving it? Is the real question. So, Karela is Karela. How do you receive it when you eat it? And how do I receive it when I eat it? Just like you said, the AC is at 24. How do you receive it and how do I receive it? It's not really about the AC being at 24. It's not really about the hot and cold that should bring. Because there's a notion in each one of our heads that 24 should be cold. That's not the truth. That's a notion. If we base our entire experience on that notion, which is what we end up doing as children grow up, we give them stories. And we start accepting some of those stories as truths. And then we start basing our entire authentic experience and lived voices against those should be, ought to be stories. And I think if we flip that completely to say, but who gave that story in the first place? Why is that the truth? Just because it was the dominant story around us? This is what boys do, this is what girls do, this is what gender is, this is what mental health is, this is what you're okay to speak about, this is what you're not okay to speak about, this is what education is. All these are stories. So by the time we are adults, we have learned to keep our own authentic voice and stories, sometimes at the back burner, to say, that's not the important thing. Let me first figure out what the dominant discourse is. So if 24 degrees centigrade is supposed to be cold and I'm actually feeling hot, then I must be wrong. So my experience of life in weightage and in salience against that dominant discourse, imagine there's a comparison. And therefore, I judge myself against that. And that's what we are spending time on. Whereas life's happening every second. And you can easily make it 25 or 26 and discuss and, sort of get on with what you actually wish to spend time on doing. So I think sometimes flipping the question and saying, Is that what's really important? Or is there something else that I'm missing? And there's this lovely question that one of my sort of coaches/mentors asks. And I have taken that question and I ask it of myself very often. In doing what I'm doing, what am I really doing? So if I'm looking at something and doing something, can I go a little bit zoomed out and say, in doing this, what am I really doing? What position am I coming from? What is it that I'm holding inside? And what am I really doing right now? So my question to the person sitting in front of me often in the room is, okay, 24-degree, Karela, alcohol, substances. What do you make of it? What meaning would you like to make of it? How does it impact you? And what do you want to do about it? So it's not really in the thing outside. It is about how you are responding and receiving. And that's very real to you. And that is very important to you in the business of your life. And I think if all of us understand that and are able to have some time set aside for an inner journey or an inward journey right from childhood, in many different ways. It doesn't mean meditation. It just means, are we aware of our insides? And I think that in itself would make the job of mental health professionals possibly not as important as it seems to be today. Because I do think that mental health in that sense is about, am I able to look at my inner world and understand it and how that impacts my interface with the outer world? And is there a bridge? Am I bringing my inner world with awareness into my everyday interface or not? Or I'm saying that's different. I'm going to disconnect from what's happening inside because what's required of me outside or what I can even bring outside is so different, either constricted or modified, that I don't feel whole as a person when I bring myself into the outer world. And I think that's partly where mental health and wellness is taking a toll. Because this disconnect is becoming increasingly obvious to many young people once they reach a certain age. And then we don't know what to do about it because this disconnect is not really just internal. It is actually a reflection of where our social structures are and what is being demanded of children, young people, adults, and what actually their voices inside or their inner lived experiences are saying. So again, I think the words to or the interpretations of what I truly live through versus what I'm trying to find in the dominant discourse outside is sometimes so starkly different that in itself creates tension and mental health issues. And I think we've started using the word intersectionality in that so often. But actually that's, it's a big word.
I mean, it's a big word, but it's just life. Life is just sectional. I don't know. But so then how does lived experience help you with that? This informal sharing. In our day-to-day, we are constantly sharing, consuming, potentially sharing in our disconnection. And it's all out there. And so, according to you, how can I make meaning of the lived experience that I consume around me? There are some unhelpful, harmful ways in which you can also experience it. You know, like you mentioned, like if someone's been through a slightly more traumatic or longer, comorbidity thing.
Yeah, or illness, or
It could be hard for them to hear this. I have lived experience and I share my lived experience, and sometimes I'm really like, I don't know if everybody with lived experience should be allowed to speak on a mic. And I remember I told you this, and then you had said, yeah, but not every professional knows what they're saying either. And I was like, that is true. If you took the same sample size, it would average out.
Life, yes.
But then my question really is, how as an individual do I figure this out where I can, where I can make use or meaning of what I'm consuming?
So I would say that the way I look at it is use it as pieces of information, definitely. So much like there is a spectrum of professionals with different levels of knowledge, expertise, compassion, commitment. Similarly, people with lived experience also come with a huge spectrum of experiences. So I think the problem happens when the person who's consuming this information, because they are often in a vulnerable state, sometimes they will take the weightage or the importance of the singular lived experience of one person, if that's the first one they found, and internalize that as the whole truth, and then proceed from there. And I think that can be problematic, because that is the lived experience of one person in a certain neighborhood, in a certain context, of a certain age, written in a certain way, and you may not even know them, maybe in a different country, existing in a different family. So when you say zoom out and see this person's experience in the context that they live in, and then apply it to yourself, I think that's the most relevant part of consuming that I would recommend. That I would say do the same with a professional. That's not to do just with, it's to do with how one consumes information. The difference is often this information that you will consume, which comes from somebody else's lived experience, will be very emotional. Because the intensity of it is what usually resonates. And the feeling emotional level of it is also usually what usually resonates. It's not in the events as much, but in the feeling evoked inside you, or the feeling described by them, that actually is the connecting point. So just be aware that that is an emotional mix that is very potent.
Yeah.
And then if you're planning that you're going to base logical and treatment and care decisions on that mix, then just be aware that the base of that mix could actually be emotional, and actually you are probably reacting to that emotion. There's nothing wrong with that. But you need to be aware then that that's what you're doing. Also, that if you're holding all of that and you go to, let's say, a mental health care practitioner, they may not understand that you have this added context and that you are not entering alone. You are entering with having read Kavita's lived experience, which has generated a whole lot of things. So you're actually carrying Kavita with you when you're meeting this other professional, and you're speaking from two places, both intense, your own lived experience and this person's that you actually really relate to. And then you've come in and now you're speaking to them.
I really want to break this down, because I've noticed it in my real life, where you talked about an emotionally charged situation. I can also watch a video of lived experience where someone is emotionally charged and using a certain kind of terminology that I may not necessarily be using regularly. Just vocabulary that is not natural to me. But I have just learned from this person. Now, when I come in to talk to my therapist or my psychiatrist, I'm using all of these words and saying, I think it's this, or this is what's happening. And I sometimes remind, so I go with people sometimes to meet a therapist, and I have to be like, wait, go back. Just describe your experience. Forget what it's called and forget what it's because of and what and how. Sure, we can get there. But first, just describe your experience. Because otherwise, like you said, I'm coming in and I've been through, my dog just passed away, and I just listened to a lived experience of somebody else whose dog has passed away, and three more things happened there. And I'm upset about that also. And then I'm coming in here and I'm telling you, but I'm just emotionally far more tentative, sensitive, reactive to all sorts of things. So I think technically a professional may not be able to emotionally engage you as much as someone who's lived through something very similar to you. And if you're in a vulnerable place, the possibility of you buying into that and seeping into that is much higher. Again, not to say it's a bad thing or a good thing, but it'll naturally happen. And I think part of the healing comes from the fact that you feel so connected.
Absolutely.
To the person. And I think something that we often miss or let go of is we want things fast, right? So I don't want to listen to 25 people with lived experience. I'm like, I can listen to one, and then, but the whole idea, even if you were to take lived experience into policy or academia, it wouldn't be one lived experience person, right? It would be a whole bunch of different people coming together and, bit by bit, developing a collective understanding of what does this look like for us to be able to treat it in a helpful manner. Like what you said in terms of what am I actually...
In doing what I'm doing, what am I really doing?
Yeah, right? Because why am I collecting these people with lived experience in a room to talk to? Like, what am I trying to do with that? When I'm on the internet scrolling on Instagram and I'm looking for people with lived experience, why am I doing that? Like, what am I trying to do in doing that?
So what's my need, really?
Yeah. And I think that's a helpful way to look at it. Because right now, if my need is just emotional, then I don't really have to take what they did seriously.
Yeah.
I can just connect with them emotionally and be like, I feel seen and heard. Versus if I want, advice, maybe I should listen to a bunch of them before making any treatment decisions, like you said.
And then if you're going to a professional, what is it that you need out of that? Because oftentimes, I think what today I hear from young people is that my professional did not connect to me emotionally. So that was the need. And on the other hand, professionals are sitting there sometimes. A psychiatrist will get 10 or 15 minutes, not in the way that some people practice, but in, for example, a government hospital, you have 10 minutes. You can either connect or you can figure out next steps and make sure that they happen. And somewhere, I think I want to bring in my experience as a professional also. I worked in a government setting for many years. Then I've worked in the UK for a few years. Then I've come back and helped set up a service in the urban sort of sector, but I've also worked in certain NGOs alongside that. I find that for someone like me who is meeting, let's say, several people every day, all of whom are coming with an emotionally intense experience of some sort or the other, or their caregivers are, very few of us as professionals have the wherewithal and the capacity to do it day on day and remain open every day to everyone with the same emotional capacity. It is hard. And we are all human.
I think it's a bad idea.
So people stop after a few years.
Figured.
They retire or they change professions, which is also not sustainable. But that's a separate conversation. But and that requires looking after oneself and all of that. But I think if we are clear what this space is about, when someone's approaching a professional, whether a psychologist or a expressive arts therapist or a psychiatrist, what is this space meant to do? If that can be a clear expectation between the two people or the family and the professional, I really think that would actually be very helpful for the profession as well as for the client, because I think those expectations have changed dramatically. And I think some of the discontent that is rampant right now, both from the side of mental health professionals about how clients present, as well as from the side of the community, it says, psychiatrists and doctors, and they're no good. Both of them is because this expectation has changed so dramatically, but we haven't kept up with or defined those expectations at all. I have not met too many people who are not committed in the mental health professional. I've worked with a lot of young psychologists. They all want to do good. It's hardly anyone. They have entered this profession because they want to make a difference. I don't think I can question the intent of 99% of the professionals. So then what's going wrong? Why are people unhappy? But look at healthcare today in the urban sector. It's moved away from where people live, and often it is in huge, very imposing, concrete towers. The expectation as you look at it in its design is you will sit there like a classroom and wait for God. And God is behind a closed door. You can't see them. Sometimes this door opens a little bit. It's manned by the gatekeeper who comes out, and you have to keep looking. This person will exit, this person will go in. That's the entire setting of healthcare right now. It creates a power equation from day one, from point one. And then you're going to go in and you're going to speak to this person. And it's not even just mental health care. I think that's the urban healthcare setting across the world. So the profession itself and the expectation from it has changed so dramatically that but somewhere in our minds, the aspiration of what a doctor should do has not changed. So I do think that sometimes the lived experience of professionals also needs to be looked at with a lot of compassion, and with a lot of, at the risk of sounding controversial, reverence.
It's very hard.
It's not just hard. There is no one who should put you in a position of deciding for someone else about either life or death, about whether they need to go on the ventilator or not, whether they need to go off the ventilator or not. To be in that position of decision making is just not okay. And from there, I think also the responsibility and accountability of collaborative care and therefore lived experience and caregiver experience is so important, and it is so simple. It cannot be anything else. We have to share accountability and we have to make collective decisions. It is not the doctor's decision. It just isn't. It ought not to be in today's world. It has to be collaborative care. It has to take into account also, especially in mental illnesses, the person who's taking care at home. of this person who's unable to often take care of themselves. And those are silent voices too. The caregiver, the mother of the child of that mother. All those are just, they need to be included. Because I, as a psychiatrist, for example, will see you for an hour, and that many people tell me is expensive. Usually it is 10 minutes. But the rest of the 23 hours of all the 7 days of the entire month and year, who's looking after and who's making those decisions and taking those decisions daily, day after day, minute after minute, without the knowledge, information, backing, support of whatever it is that this psychiatrist may know? Because there's no way to exchange that.
Yeah. So the idea that, the psychiatrist is there to collect information from you, from your support circle, whoever that may include, whoever's living around you, whoever is in your life and you are in theirs.
Absolutely.
And to sort of be able to present to you options and suggestions rather than say, this is what you
and collectively, sort of point out the allies, the resources, the possibilities, but also what could go wrong. And to, in a sense, so I do see that as a psychiatrist sometimes, because I may have seen 100 young people with a similar sort of illness or disorder and followed them through over a period of time, I'm privileged to know that there is a likelihood of how this may unfold. I may not know and predict or be able to predict, but there is a sort of sense that I have that maybe this person who's going through it for the first time may not have, their caregivers may not have. And it is my ethical duty, I think, and I'm using that word because I do feel it very strongly, and responsibility to be able to share that in a way that helps them and supports them rather than scares them. But it is extremely important to be in a collective care, collective decision-making, collaborative system, because that's the only way mental health care and mental illnesses can be taken care of. I do not think that the current model works. I think it's broken across the world.
But we're on the journey and we're in the change.
Absolutely. Let me not sound pessimistic.
No.
I'm very hopeful. Especially with the lived experience piece coming in, people talking about it. But more importantly, I think we are beginning to anchor in the invisible. We are beginning to say that mental health is important.
So, the two last things that I wanted to make sure that we touch upon is the responsibility of the person sharing, and then also the rights of the person sharing. This is for each person to decide on their own, I guess, but at least me personally, I feel like if I have a public platform, then I have a certain amount of responsibility. At least for me personally, I feel like I have a certain amount of responsibility. It's sort of for me like I've been through this horrible feeling that I cannot necessarily articulate. And I'm sharing that story for maybe a couple of reasons, like maybe, it makes me feel useful, it makes me feel heard, and it's helpful for you or the person listening. So I don't want it to hurt you. But when I started, I was like, no, I want people to understand what depression is really like. So I should just be truthful about what it is. Then I deleted those videos because I was like, but I put a thing saying this is not safe. This is not a safe space. So know that if you're walking into it. So I guess from a psychoeducation point of view, maybe you want to get very authentic, very descriptive details of someone's lived experience, but not generally speaking, I would imagine. Because, like you said, what you're looking for from it is not to be scared or to be, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I'd say that while you were speaking, 3 words came to me. One is intention. So to ask myself, what is my intention right now in the sharing? An understanding of context. Like you said, is it a research lab that I'm sharing in? Is it a public platform? Is it my best friend who needs to know? So the context is very important, and the sharing may actually change in the context because the intention changes possibly. But the third is impact. In the sharing itself, I think one of the things, at least I have understood, is whether it is intentional or it is unintentional. Intense experiences and their sharing will have an impact. And you cannot control it. The kind of evocation or what gets evoked in the person listening, especially if you're talking about a public platform, you will not be able to control. There'll be a subset of people who will not get to the part with hope. So when you were talking about in the content, they will pick up other keywords because that's what they're looking for. It's like when you tell a story. Each time that you may have heard the story, and there are stories that we hear often and are repetitions of stories, each time you actually pick up something different from the story and you interpret it and you internalize something different. That's actually what happens in sharing, because these are also stories. So I'd say just one thing. There are stories that we need to tell because I need to tell them. And there are stories that people need to hear, and they may be very different. So when I am telling a story as a sharing, my intention, my context and understanding of the context may be very different from how it's going to be received. So what people may need to hear in that moment is what they will hear, and you will not be able to control impact. I don't think anybody can. And therefore, the term responsibility of what part of your story are you sharing when and with whom. So I think that's where I am at. Oftentimes as professionals, we are also, it's a conundrum, Ira, that I often find as professionals, we don't bring in our lived experience into the professional space. So, for example, I have been a caregiver to somebody with mental illness. However, when somebody's coming to consult me as a psychiatrist, that's not the part I'm supposed to bring in. I'm supposed to bring it out, keep it out. And I'm supposed to be this person with this degree who looks after this. But that is my whole self too. And actually, according to me, that informs a lot of what I am actually sort of discussing. But I'm not supposed to bring it in, or that's the notion. Keep it out, otherwise you're not objective. Similarly, when somebody is sharing, somebody like you is sharing, what part to keep in, what part to keep out is a journey in itself. I don't think impact is something any of us is able to control, and I think we need to be at peace with that. And I also don't think that content alone is what creates impact. I think the very fact that there is sharing on a public platform, that context and the building of that context in itself is very important. That somebody is sharing about mental health, about themselves on a public platform. What could be the intention? Because 10 years ago, people would want to hide it. If someone's willing to share it today, what is the intention? And I think raising that question in the audience's mind becomes important, because that's the question really. What has changed? Why is this person sharing today something that possibly will also be unpleasant for you to share, because our brain and our mind works like that. When you share about a past unpleasant experience, and mental illness is not a pleasant experience by any standards, there's in the retelling of it, in the revisiting of it, there is the possibility of the reliving of it in part. And that is often extremely unpleasant. So why is this person okay to be vulnerable in the retelling with so many people? And that, I think, is sometimes so much more important in its impact than the actual content.
The horrible answer coming to my mind is for attention.
And the why of that? Why would you want attention?
Because you're sad and lonely. And you're not getting it. And so you need it from somewhere. I just baby voiced that. I'm so sorry, guys. But it's what I felt. Because every time someone tells me, oh, they're doing it for attention, I'm like, well, then they must really not be getting it from the
Do you think that's
place that
attention?
they-
Or let me
As
have
in-
a counter narrative of, is that really connection? The seeking is of attention or connection? And if you're able to see that in anyone, and if they're able to get connection from elsewhere, I think the need goes away. So going back to not looking at it as a manifest, to looking back at it as a manifest, and really asking the question, in doing what I'm doing, what am I really doing? What is my need? So the need of this person to share, and I mean, I don't think there's a singular need. I think you're being a little bit self-critical when you say attention, or critical of, it has to be more than that. It has to be many different ingredients, because I actually believe there is no singular emotion. I think this is a complex pool of emotions that makes us act in such a way where our own inner world that we often strive to hide and protect is laid bare. And I don't think that it is only for attention by anyone. I do think that the person is seeking connection and doesn't have it, and is lonely and possibly in self-doubt about the reality of what transpires inside them. And
Yeah.
often in our culture, I think our children, not adults, children are told that they're doing a certain behavior for attention. I cannot remember how many times I have sat in rooms and helped to paraphrase that in the mind of the room to say, can we look at why they would need attention in the first place? Should they not be getting it? They're a child. So maybe we look beyond and see, and often, very often, it is connection that they're seeking. And there are many ways to connect. But I think the human condition seeks connection.
100%. I think connection is what we are all always looking for and trying to achieve in all sorts of ways. And now with, I think, social media and just the various different technology that exists, our options have exploded. And we haven't quite figured out how to use them yet.
We will. We'll get there.
Yes. So according to you, what would be the safest places, platforms, ways in which to consume lived experience? If I'm a user on social media and I'm like, I heard Kavita Arora's episode. I want to, read some lived experience, listen to some lived experience. Where would be a safe?
Today, in today's world, is there a safe space? I think very few peer support groups exist which are facilitated or safe. That would be a very good space.
So if you can find a peer support.
If you can find a peer support group, if you can find through your mental health provider a support group as well. I think there's certain kinds of online support groups of a certain nature that are also helpful, but most of them are unmoderated. So it's difficult to say who's entering that group. We also know that on online forums, sometimes whatever rules are in place are really not followed. I don't think the social media platform is right now in any way a regulator of any sort. And that's why sometimes it's unsafe, because it is left to one person who has no idea who the consumer is, and the consumer who actually has not much idea about this person in real life. So it's fairly unsafe as a platform. Some people have found books helpful, or even lived experience articles. I don't think there's enough out there. I think people still often want to sit across one person. And I think while we agree that may not be enough sometimes, I think the power of connection with someone sitting in front of you in person is probably far higher than anything else, really, as a sharing. So I do think that we have not utilized that kind of lived experience sharing, and we've not really developed a model of care that could include that yet. I do think it would be very helpful, because just from the need point of it, that would be immense. And even for caregivers, finding another caregiver who has had similar experiences and understands and is able to nod along, because I don't think that's also something a professional understands often.
Yeah. One thing that I find very important to highlight is that a lot of times people have like there are public awareness campaigns where they ask people to come up and share their story and talk about things. And I'm always a little bit like, please make sure you've thought about whether you want to share, because like you said, it's now social media is a pervasive platform where once you share, it's out there. And I think it's far more important to fight your own fight and take care of yourself first before you decide that it is your responsibility to share. I have a completely tangential point. I don't think it's even possible for someone to put aside their lived experience coming into any room. So as much training as may be given to professionals to put aside their own lived experience, some amount of it will walk into that therapy room with you. And at one point, I was thinking there should be a regulation that all mental health professionals have to have lived experience. Otherwise, they should not be allowed only to practice.
Well, we all have lived experience. If you look at lived experience as life, we all do. And I do think that sometimes we don't give credence to someone who's sitting in that room, someone like me, who has heard 1,000 different stories and who has had the privilege of knowing personal, shared, intimate details of 1,000 different lives. Imagine what that lived experience could actually be. And I think we just do not give enough credence to that.
I guess even if you haven't had your own lived experience with mental illness, if you've heard 1,000 people talk about it, then
I think there's so many ways that lived experience piece, not just of somebody who has lived with mental illness in its various stages, but also people who have observed, interacted with, worked with, lived through being a caregiver, lived through being somebody who has sat in rooms, even, for example, in inpatient hospitals. There is such wisdom in the people who actually do the 24/7 duty in the ward where there is mental illness rampant. There is such wisdom. And we don't take that into account. I think the way that we look at care in the mental illness, mental health world right now is not based on actual needs. It is based on what started off as a model of mental illness, and we are just trying to fix that broken model repeatedly. But we're not really looking at it from a point of view of need and then opportunity. But that's a big statement to say at the end of a conversation. Sorry.
No, not at all, because I feel like that's sort of what we've talked about this whole time in terms of need. So what is missing, and intention? What are we trying to do? And then finding the various tools, for lack of better words, that do that. And one of them is lived experience of a mental illness. One of them is lived experience of just being a professional who's heard so many people. And then they will obviously be merit in the actual science of it as well. And all of it come together to solve the need that is
absolutely
arising. Thank you so much for this conversation and for talking to me. There's one thing that we do at the end of every episode, which is at Agatsu, our proposition to the world is emotional hygiene, which is that you learn to take care of yourself on a day-to-day basis when things are fine. And one of the things in that is that minds are hardwired to notice the negative so that we save ourselves from threat. And sometimes you need to actively undo that. So just, a little nudge for each of us to consciously put a little bit of
joy
thought
diet
and attention into things that went okay or not bad. So yeah, that's what we're going to do. You can't talk about your whole life. You have to talk about from morning to today, to now. Please don't say this podcast.
How long a list can I have?
That's a good sign.
You can see that this is something I do often in my head. Okay, so I'm going to stop and just say a couple of the things.
Sure.
I think the ability to be present with my whole self is something that I'm truly grateful for. Till a few years ago, this may not have been possible. To have language, to be able to articulate what I wish to say, to have people like you, and the entire team here that is making the space for this, and to know that I have a voice that seems to matter, and I have the ability to share, and I'm okay to share, that I've reached a point in my journey where this is okay to do. And more concretely about my body, that I have eyesight, I'm able to hear, I'm able to write, I'm able to think. I think these are very precious, and sometimes we are not aware of these privileges. Yeah, I'll stop there for the time being.
Mine sounds so lame now. I've written nimbus.
Oh, lovely.
Because I have a bad stomach, so everyone has been giving me nimbus and nimbu pani all day, and I love nimbu pani, and it's so nice to
To have the love and the nimbus.
Yeah, they're making it for me, and I don't even have to be like, can you please make me Nimbu Pani? They're just like, I'll make you Nimbu Pani, and I was like, okay, thanks.
Imagine the joy of anticipation. कि पता है लोगों को.
Anyway, thank you so much, Kavita.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you for watching The Curious Case Off with me. In the description below, there will be links, further reading, summaries, guidelines, resources, everything that we could find and put together that we think you might find helpful. Just to reiterate that everything that is said in the episode as well as in the resources below should not be used to self-diagnose. If you have any questions or queries, please reach out to a mental health professional who is qualified. And if you like the episode, then like, share, and subscribe to Agatsu Foundation, our YouTube channel. And if you want to know anything more about the organization, then you can find out at www.agatsufoundation.org.